Welcome everyone to this Wednesday winter webinar series edition. And we're looking at an intro to produce safety for wholesale buyers. And my name's Hans Estrin. Thrilled to have Annie Harlow and Emily Reiss with us. Annie's a consultant who has a wealth of experience in everything sort of wholesale, the whole supply chain really, but a lot of buyer experience as well. And Emily is my cohort in the CAPS program, and the CAPS audit program is really going to be the lead example when we're talking about produce safety for wholesale buyers. So I think what we'll do first is just get a sense of who is in the room, and we'll have a introduction then, and what do you need to know about selling wholesale, and then produce safety. We'll come to this outline in just a minute. But why don't we go ahead and launch? We're going to do a quick poll just to, I don't know how many people are here, but yeah, let's put up the poll. We'll have 3 quick questions just to get a sense of who's in the room anonymously about your markets. So can you do that? Becky, thank you. Yeah, so go ahead and answer those 3 questions. Do you sell wholesale? What's your approximate wholesale retail mix? And do you have a produce safety plan? Yes or no? Okay, so this is good. We have the majority of the folks in the room don't sell wholesale yet. And that's what you're in the right classroom, because if you're an expert at wholesale, we'll have you help present. Number 2, approximate wholesale retail mix. Most of the folks are in the 0 to 5% of wholesale. And there's a couple of growers who do a significant amount of wholesale. So those of you that answered the 26 to 50%, definitely pipe up and make in comments in the text, or if we have time at the end, or raise your hand and we might even call on you. Produce safety plan, let's see. So this is good. Most of you don't have a produce safety plan. And I think you all can see that result, but I'm stopping it. And perfect. This is you're the exact audience we're looking for, which is, you're here to learn a bit more about, well, what does it take from a produce safety perspective to get into wholesale? And that's what we're here to do. So introductions, Annie's going to speak a bit on this whole buyer and wholesale versus direct to consumer, buyer side expectations. And then I'm going to really jump into the produce safety basics. So whole crop versus cross-contamination, clean and cool processing and pack out, structure, equipment needs and costs. And then Emily's going to talk a little bit about the CAPS Plus program, audit program, and sort of what it takes to get in there and come out with a certificate you can present to a buyer who actually needs it or would like it. And then we'll have a little time, hopefully, for questions and answers discussion. Okay. So, Annie, is this you?
This is me. Thanks, Hans.
All right, take it away.
Yeah, so as a brief introduction, I'm here because I have been a wholesale grower. I have worked on the San Francisco produce terminal. I have been a large retail buyer and manager over the years, and I work as an independent consultant across the full supply chain from the farm through to retail sales. So I kind of have every angle covered. And when I get to speak on this subject today, it's mostly helping you understand some of the buyer side variables that are attached to wholesale. And wholesale for produce really comes through, there's 2 major categories that we're looking at in selling the food: the direct to consumer, which many of you might be doing already through farm stands and CSAs, and farmers market might be looking at a different market channel that might include wholesale. And wholesale is, in essence, there's a lot we could talk about here, but in essence, you are as a farmer, as a grower, you're selling a larger amount to fewer buyers. And the buyers are purchasing these larger amounts that will help them meet their financial needs, whether they're a distributor, a food hub, or retail outlet. And they are doing this to meet their customer needs, which might be selling to a store as if they were a distributor or food hub, but the store is looking to meet their financial needs by meeting their shoppers. And so all of this comes into play because there are different scales of wholesale operation. There's small scale where you as a grower may be selling to a local restaurant. That is a wholesale sale, but it's on a small scale. And then there might be a larger scale that you're interested in that might be, say, a store or a co-op that has multiple stores. So that scale is a little bit larger and the dollar values are a little bit larger and your crop values are going to be a little bit larger as well. And then the super large category of wholesale is selling to, say, a large distributor that might be reaching a regional market, something outside of your general purview from a small scale. And so I like to differentiate those three scales within the wholesale market because the demands on food safety also come into play. So there is a really large shift in your farming operation to meet that largest scale assurances that buyers want. And those can include a number of different types of certifications and accreditations. And they want to know that food safety and food safety practices are intrinsic to your operation and well established. Also from both sides, from the buy side and the sell side, you as the seller, insurance matters, that comes into play. And I think in general, a minimum amount is $1 million liability coverage is sought for the smaller and the medium sized wholesale buyers. Could be a lot more through the larger distribution. And another part of this selling wholesale is the relationship. We talk about it in so many different ways, the farmer relationships, but the buyer and the farmer, the wholesale buyer and the farmer are intrinsically locked in keeping the relationship going. And within that, I always like to mention that not only is it the buyer that we're looking at, but we're also looking at what happens at the receiving dock for that wholesale sale. And so yeah, those are the kind of the first overviews that I want you to look at. So another piece of understanding wholesale, if you're moving into this market channel, is that it's an intermediary, meaning that there's other people handling your food. You are giving up some control of your cold chain and your handling and your pricing. And that's a whole nother thing that we can get into regarding the pricing. And we've covered that in the past through the Veggie Berry listserv. But one of the things that's super important is for you to recognize that when you're selling wholesale, you are not selling to the end user. If you're selling it to a restaurant or a store, you're obviously putting it into their mix. And if it's selling through a large distributor of any size, you're also they're selling it to somebody that will ultimately become the end user, being it the restaurant or the shopper at the store. And not all wholesale is created equal. And that's an important thing because the parameters around food safety can be shifted in the mindset of who you're selling it to. And oftentimes the larger the operation, the more I don't want to really put it this way, but the more important the food safety standards will come down onto you as a grower. A lot of times, say with a restaurant or food hub, the relationships can be very personal, and that can be very advantageous. You can advocate for your own business, and the larger you get, the harder it is to be that advocate for your business. And sometimes in a larger operation, say like a deep root growers co-op, there's a whole entity behind to represent and advocate for those sales at that larger wholesale level. And that larger wholesale level can come in as defined as commodity. And that again represents a pricing differential as well as the relationship differential, which also circles back into the risk levels. They shift across your operations. And when we're looking at food safety and operations and standard operating procedures for your farm, it's super important to recognize that the different types of wholesale buyers might have different parameters that they're working with. And that comes with a learning curve for many farms, and that's why this webinar can be very valuable, because as we get into the next phase of learning about the relationship of wholesale with the types of buyers, you're going to see a lot of really great information on that food safety piece. But let's advance to the next slide, because wholesale can have a very important role in your farm. And one of the things that ties into the different market channels, be it direct to consumer, through farm stands, CSAs, and retail, is that you have a direct relationship with your customer. And that's a real personality trait. Like, some people just love that part of farming. When you get into wholesale, you change up those relationship dynamics. You're also changing up your risk dynamics, financial dynamics as well. And when it comes to wholesale, there's a growing framework that takes into consideration as well. Like, you might really love having less product in your diversified crops and fewer buyers, and that's a real the wholesale buyer, meaning they're buying more of your crops at a distinct how do I say it? You know, you're not growing a ton of smaller crop plantings. You're streamlining, and the larger you go on that, the more efficient you become. So when you are building your relationships, you have to take into this lifestyle and your business plan. You can improve your efficiency and farm viability, and you can also evaluate how that fits into the big picture of all of your market channels. So you might be then having off some market channels to develop your wholesale. It's not uncommon, and it plays a role, again, depending on what size of that wholesale relationship you want, small, medium, large. So you can simplify a lot of your production, as well as your sales and marketing aspects are also changed in this relationship. So the focus on product consistency is a big part of wholesale. The relationship with your types of buyers is important. The risk level is definitely there with wholesale. If for some reason a grower loses a strong account, that really has an impact. So that goes into the weighing out of what type of farmer you are, what personality, and what type of business person you are as you're looking at these market channels. Some of these smaller relationships, like restaurants and food stores, smaller localized food stores, can be really add a lot of visibility to your farm as well, where people go into the store and they see your name, and they also have known you from the farmers market or your CSAs and things like that. So there's a lot of add-on value in some of the smaller wholesale as well. Did I cover everything there, Hans?
I think so. Yeah,
I didn't read it.
what's interesting from my perspective is that there's some growers that really this fits, and it's about their personality and being it's simpler, it's more straightforward, less to deal with.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've got to really focus on the few relationships you have, because it's like you only have a few eggs in the basket, and
Yeah.
you don't want to lose them.
Yeah. And I'm just, if I can right here, add personally, I've been a large buyer, and it's important for a farmer that wants to reach out that a buyer has to have a reason to purchase your product. And that could be they already have that crop represented, or it doesn't really fit their customer base. And that's super important for people to understand. Just because you have it doesn't mean the buyer needs it. And that can be a hard pill to swallow sometimes. But let's move on, because I know we have a ton to cover.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so the buyer expectation levels vary, as kind of I alluded to. Reliable, predictable products. If you say you're going to have something, the buyer wants to have it. They want to make their sales. Ordering ease and convenience, that can be very personalized, because some people want text, email, phone, it might not all be the same. Cold chain is super important. I'm a big fan of cold chain and understanding that importance. You also have to recognize that some wholesale buyers have very distinct windows of opportunity for receiving the product that you have to fit into. Product uniformity and safety concerns. The product uniformity piece can vary by type of buyer. It's really important to establish that in your relationship. And buyers want clear and accurate invoicing. They will take hold of the marketing and promotion of your product. So you might lose some of that. They might ask you to engage in some farm marketing and promotion, material that they can then put on their stand, or promote on their restaurant website and things like that. So the buyer expectation varies depending on the type of wholesale that you're engaged in. And again, we can go really deep on this, but we're going to advance the conversation right now. Here we go on the food safety plans. These can be very variable. And we're going to get into and we have a number of different food safety certificates available. Your word is an asset to your business. And so you want to be sure that what you are presenting to any buyer, you're holding that truth for that buyer. That is a sense of assurance as well. And we mentioned it earlier, a minimum of $1 million liability is enough to get going. It's generally, it's not an expensive business cost, but it's one that, depending on the type of wholesale, they want to see that insurance is in place. So again, we can spend a whole day on this one. The farmer should expect assurances as well. The communication goes both ways. It takes a lot to establish ongoing relationships, and each wholesale buyer entity is going to be unique. And it's important to recognize that and build that into your ethos and how you're doing your business. You want that wholesale buyer to honor your product with appropriate handling, and that doesn't always happen, and that can be really hard, like on a retail in a retail store where your product is out there but it doesn't look that great because it hasn't been handled well. That can be a real issue for you, because that they're not maybe rotating their product or handling it the way. So you would like to be able to voice that in a productive manner. It's always great to have seasonal debriefing with your buyers. Seasonal is kind of an open-ended term, but it's really important as the communication to see what went well on both sides. for you and for the buyer. And then Annie always says it's not a sale until you're paid. So wholesale can be lag payments, and it's really important that you as a farmer stay on top of your accounts receivable so that you know that you are getting paid in a timely way. Every category of wholesale has every business is its own mechanism for payments, but you want to be really clear and you need to keep track of that at the farm level. And I also want to say there are different types of wholesale, as we see here. We've got wholesale blueberries that are packaged for grab and go in the freezer, and then we also have some minimally processed produce. So wholesale also is not just about raw food. However, food safety plays a role at every level. So let's advance through, Hans, unless you want to add something to that.
Okay. I have a slide here that I really want to ignore the thing that is on the screen, implement. It shouldn't be there, but we'll get there in a minute. So yeah, thank you, Annie, for that great sort of introduction and context for looking at produce safety for wholesale markets. And honestly, most of the photos you'll see, most of my experience comes from, running helping to get the CAPS community accreditation for produce safety off the ground. And then since 2016, running this audit program for wholesale markets. So we've learned a lot along the way, and I'm sharing sort of what I think of as some of the key things for wholesale and drawing from farms that I've worked with. So basically the steps sort of to get into produce safety, and this is really for anyone, but this is more important for wholesale markets, is that you're really assessing your risk. First, you're looking at your farm with sort of these risk assessment glasses on, and you're looking from field to customer. So you're just going to step back 30,000 foot view, and then once you have sort of figured out what you think the risks are, you make a plan really and develop standard operating procedures to minimize those risks. So this is a little bit of a HACCP approach, if you know about that. And once you have a plan, you need to train and equip the people that are going to actually implement the plan, which are your employees or you. And that includes both sort of training them on the SOPs, but also, when they need to do them, how exactly, why is really important. And implement the plan is really, that's during the season, right? And people are carrying that out. And of course, employees knowing why and having buy-in is essential to kind of keep the momentum up. And you need to verify the plan. And that includes, generally speaking, for wholesale buyers, third-party audits with some kind of certificate. So in a nutshell, assessing risks, planning to minimize the risks, training and equipping people to actually carry out your plan, and then implementing that plan, and then verifying that it actually happened. So it's pretty logical. And when you think about risks, really, it's good to sort of you might be overwhelmed by everything, but if you look at, okay, there's whole crop contamination. This could be the worst, right? It's where the entire crop is doused with E. coli, for example, from, say, surface water from a river spraying on spinach, which I think is that first picture there. And this is a real thing, even for us. We have spikes of 1,000 E. coli or hundreds of E. coli per 100 millimeter sample in a lot of our bigger rivers throughout the summer season. And it's a fairly regular thing. So it's really important, to think about get the cleanest source of water you can. If you need to spray overhead for greens, well water is the best, but oftentimes you can't do that. So if you're outside, like in that first river water picture, the best solution, if you're going to use that, is to have a drying period for 3 to 4 days or over 4 days, depending on the quality of that water, will reduce the risk to an acceptable level. Amendments, thinking about safe storage, having kill steps for compost. This picture here a farm yet to be named, but if you think about this, a serious 2-inch rainfall coming quick with runoff, if there were leafy greens right next to that, that could be a problem. This was going to get planted into corn or cover crop, I can't remember, so it was not an issue at all in this case. And then if you're incorporating compost directly, 90 to 120 days, that's an accepted standard from the NOFA side, and that still works. And if you're making compost, heating it to 131 degrees for 5 days minimum, turning the pile, that kind of stuff. So many people know that. So those are the two, we just hit the two major full crop contamination. Everything else is basically could be classified as cross-contamination. So that's something's contaminated and it's spreading that contamination onto some of the crop, if or it could be a little of it or a significant amount. So humans are probably the people who've got their hands on everything, your employees, and as we talked about earlier, training them is a really key thing, and that's obviously something that everyone should do, but it's especially important in wholesale. And the culture shift, so this photo is at Denison Farm, and they've had the best food safety training photos. They keep sending them in like each year of the crew doing their thing. So this is an example. And they're signing forms that they've read the health and hygiene policy here and having a good time with it. And I can tell you from being on that farm, there is buy-in with this crew. They're having a good time and they do their job well. And that buy-in means it has to be authentic, and the authenticity really comes from the person in charge. So you've got to think about that. You can't just tell people what to do and not really have reasons for it. But if you can really incorporate them in understanding the whole thing, it will go really well. And it can really increase the morale of crews as well, if they know what they need to do, how to keep things clean and organized and be efficient. And then you have to actually provide facilities. So toilet facility, hand wash, cut care, that kind of thing. Here's an example from Heron Pond Farm. It can be simple, as you can see, duct tape, signs, and a little piece of, some plywood and an old sink in that case. The other probably really important, most important cross-contamination risk is with post-harvest water after you harvest the product. So dunk tanks, who many people use. And it's an interesting point, but like dunk tanks really are used not to clean the product, but they're used for quality. So you're not reducing the risk of the product, you're actually increasing it because of the cross-contamination risk of that water. But it does very much help get grit off, and it helps quickly reduce the temperature of the product. All that might be needed for the buyer. So how do you deal with that, right? Sanitizing the water is probably the most surefire way to reduce the level of cross-contamination really to a minimal amount, close to zero, in a dunk tank. And then frequent water changes is also important. And you can also go with single pass spray, and hands-free is best if you do that. And single pass is great for bunches, obviously, bunch crops, many root crops as well. So sanitizing, water changing, just to, there's obvious reasons for doing that. The amount of grit and stuff that accumulates in a dunk tank, if you are not treating that, and you keep dumping more and more raw products into it, the levels of E. coli rise throughout that time. And we've seen very high levels, I think close to, thousands of E. coli per 100 milliliter sample on our farms 15 years ago or so, when we did a fairly comprehensive field study. So this is an example of Tsunami 100 is one of the proxyacetic acid mixes. Those are highly recommended. And Sanidate's another. Make sure you have protective gear and gloves and test strips. Test strips are important because you'll find that often you don't need to use as much as on the label, because the label is designed for water chemistry that's very unfavorable. And it sometimes can be more than is needed. And you also want to see how long it lasts. And so it's very important to have those around, even if you don't record that, if you just do it for a while and get a sense of the whole thing. Okay, so you're minimizing the risk from dunking product by these practices. Cross-contamination via surfaces, not probably as important, but very important over time, and kind of keeping reset and keeping organized. This is really essential to kind of have your daily reset, but also to clean with like a clean break. And what we mean by that is really that you're inspecting the product, scrubbing with soap and water as needed, rinsing, drying. Sanitizing is optional, actually, from the FSMA perspective, but it is important. But the key thing really is scrub with detergent and water. I've seen, interestingly, actually, I didn't want to go to the previous one here. Yeah, so many people actually have used sanitizer, and actually, we're going to get into that, so I'll move along. Okay, packet and traceability. So having a clean and cool product is really key, as the cold chain thing, as Annie was talking about, and having it be really predictable and reliable. So it kind of depends. How clean does your buyer need this? Do they want head lettuce rinsed? Are they going to do it themselves? So if you're going to a restaurant, oftentimes you might have better quality if you're harvesting a cold product and you bring it unwashed or undunked. Other times not. Generally speaking, the expectation in America, at least, or US, is that there's no grit on the product, and you want to just verify that. And if so, then you've got to do what you need to do to make that happen. And then keeping it cool, that's also something you want to connect with the buyer about. And then what about sizing and grading? So you need to sort the product. Do they need a certain size? What are they expecting for shelf life? That's pretty important. And if they are expecting something, you should be able to verify that on your end as well. This is really, we're back to the predictable expectations. Cool temperatures for perishable product is really the standard, right? And everyone knows that, but it's really important that you verify that. So you're, as a farm, the start of the cold chain, and pre-cooling and cold storage is really a default for wholesale. A lot of people who are just getting into wholesale may not have cold storage, and that may be okay if they're harvesting directly and bringing to a small restaurant, but it should be agreed upon beforehand. Otherwise, you're bringing the product at the temperature, the right storage temperature, unless you talk about it otherwise. If you don't have cold delivery or reefer unit, if you just pre-cool the product and have a fairly large mass that you're transporting, and it's a fairly short drive, you should be fine. This is a big one that kind of scares people, because traceability, I mean, most people don't even know what that even means. I don't really, except I kind of do, because I know what they're talking about. But I think what we're really talking about is identifying the product and tracking where it goes. And so traceability can start with a label, putting a label on the product, or, we'll talk about making the sale, but there's a few things. You're going one step forward. You make a sale, there's an invoice, so a record of the sale, and then you're labeling the unit that you're shipping. And that label should have some kind of code on it. And this is an example, right, of what would be kind of a proper lot code of a large distributor. And you can see this number on the bottom, 10.1.1.5.284. And really that's just talking about what farm, because in this case, this farm company has many farm locations. Almost no one needs that. What block, in this case, apples. Most people who have small 1 acre, 2 acre wholesale farms don't need a block. They know where their product's coming from based on their records. But now we get down to the type of fruit, in this case, and then the variety and the harvest date. Those things are usually pretty important. As well, you need on the label a physical address. And this actually is the law. It's even if you're a small farm that is going to farmers markets, you still on your sign at the farmers market need to have a physical address by law. And any label you make should have your physical address on it. Phone number is great as well. Here's a few examples of fancy, nice professional labels. And then here's a hand-done label from Stout Oak Farm over on the seacoast. Okay, so maybe in the chat, think about this. Does this label work and lot code? This is Deep Meadow Farm up in Ascutney, and it's an actual real label. Give you just a second. Say yes or no. Is this label good? Does it work? Are we doing the right thing? And if no one answers, so be it. This label has, there's the label, there's a lot code, and yes, actually that does work. It works fine. So what's a mock recall? That's another thing that you're going to need to do for traceability if you are doing a CAPS audit, for example, and really you're testing this one step forward, one step back on the double. You want to be able to do it quickly and efficiently. Here's an example from 2 weeks ago, I think, Jerusalem artichokes. They get put in a deep root box up in Canada and are transported to Whole Foods by a deep root truck. And here's the mock recall they sent in. A mock recall is just a record that you're in touch with a buyer. And in this case, Farm Sanders is the farm, Sanders Farm in Canada, in Quebec, and they're sending it to deep root. And they just confirmed that, yes, this exact product from this invoice was picked up and it was delivered to Whole Foods in Connecticut. So everyone who does the CAPS audit program needs to do that. If you do GAP, you need to do that as well. So now we're on to infrastructure needs and costs. We're getting towards the end here of what I was focusing on. And it really depends. There's not a ton that is actually essential or required. And I would say, I was thinking about it, really, you need this labeling and shipping stuff. That is sort of a legal requirement, but because the buyer gets to call the shots in a way on what they want for the product, it's hard to say exactly. So a restaurant, very small restaurant down the road might not really need or want much. By law, you're still required to put a label on that shipping unit. So having something to print out labels or write them on in an efficient way is really essential. And I think it's pretty essential to have, if you're labeling a lot, to have a dedicated pack and label space, or at least a kit where you can pull things out really quickly. And that might cost a little money to set up and some space as well. Printers are relatively inexpensive. You can have labels pre-printed or buy a printer and do it yourself. All this other stuff, I think cold storage sort of is an essential or is required. You may need to, you may be able to come up with an agreement otherwise, but it is pretty essential if you are trying to deliver a cool, consistent product. How are you going to harvest if it's pouring rain outside and keep the quality the same? You have to do it a couple days ahead of time. What are you going to do with it in the meantime? So all these scenarios come up that it really makes it pretty essential to have some way to put stuff in cold storage. This was a project I was involved with Bob Johnson, who's pictured here. He's now retired, but Chris Callahan and I were trying to see how inexpensive we could build a cool bot in the right way, with it all sealed for moisture. And I think we ended up around $1,500 plus the $400 CoolBot unit, which was free. And this was a 6x8 cooler. So they definitely cost something. And when you buy them new, they're going to cost a lot more than that. Sometimes you can get used coolers as well. But I would call that close to essential, depending on your situation. So other needs and costs for larger accounts. This is from Footprint Farm here, but basically it depends. And by and large, as a farm grows, so do the needs and infrastructure. So you should be able to get into wholesale potentially without doing much if you have a fairly efficient system. But as you get bigger accounts, you've got to think carefully about the efficiency. So building, wash and pack with plumbing and facilities is something that larger wholesaler growers definitely move into, and slab floors, trench drains, washable surfaces, heating, lighting. This is all sort of wash pack and never mind the production end, and that's a whole nother thing we're not getting in. But this stuff has to do with food safety. So this is a trench drain. You can use spot drains as well, but if you have a lot of dirt coming off something like a barrel washer and rocks, a trench drain is recommended. Slabs almost really is essential if you're really cranking through a ton of product and having some washable surfaces. They don't all need to be dairy board or anything like that, but at least backsplash near areas where you're doing a lot of work. So the stainless is a contact surface, and that's really important that that is washable in particular. Lights and heat is actually to the right off this picture, but an air blower that can heat up the air pretty quickly is usually the cheapest way to go if you're in there in the winter just for a few hours. How do you pay for stuff like this? Julie Callahan's a great person to connect with about that, but there are, I would start with a business plan so you can kind of think about what you need and how much it's going to cost, and then grants are available. There are some that not a ton, and then lowest interest rates loans are also available, but that's usually where most growers go. As you scale, you think about your bottlenecks. A typical bottleneck with greens is drying the product, and so moving from, say, a restaurant spinner to something like this which is a converted washing machine, can push you from like a 20 pounds of greens to 50 or over, and that even a new washing machine with a DIY is somewhere around $1,400 the last I checked. So spinners, conveyors, injectors, looms, dedicated washing, packing lines, all of these things just grow. It can kind of get bigger and bigger. And here's, some photos. This is a machine that came from China called the Air Bubble washing machine. And it was $14K. It went to Jericho Settlers, and they've used it for quite a while, or a few years now. I'm sure you can't get it for that price anymore, but something like this, or Pete's Greens has a big conveyor dedicated line, really just skyrockets your through rate with product and can be a game changer with big accounts. All the good photos are by Andy Chamberlain. I just wanted to say that. If it's a good photo, assume Andy took it. Injectors, or I should say, the rinse conveyor is a piece of equipment that is a good, 15 grand that a lot of growers have used. And sorting tables, injectors. This on the right is an injector from Farm on the River, Farm on the River. Zone storage is also, when you get into a lot more crops, you need to store them probably in perfect kind of storage, especially if you're trying to hold them with that quality expectation for any amount of time. Okay, these photos came from Sassafras Creek Farm, a little south of here. And other infrastructure, is, for storing and shipping, bulk bins, pallets, forks, wide corridors, 6 to 8 feet wide for pallet jacks. Pretty important. Corners should be 8 feet. And zone storage, we mentioned. Loading docks. You don't have to have a brand new building. This is a farm that was renovated at Last Resort Farm. And you're seeing the original plans. We helped them design this whole thing, and the loading dock that ended up going on the side of the building here. You don't necessarily need delivery trucks or reefers, but you need to figure out how to keep the product cool in whatever means. And many people end up buying their own truck and then sharing it with others. Okay, thanks again, Andy, for that photo. And we're going to move to, oops, this is not where I want to, oh yeah, this is where I want to be. We're moving into the annual assurance. What do you need? What does this this audit program look like? In this case, we're going to look at CAPS Plus and CAPS Plus LGS, which is our program that we own in this area. And the veg and berry growers really has the liability and holds the whole program. And it's administered mostly by UVM extension and grants, and also by some fees, but it's pretty well subsidized. It's similar to the GAP program as well, and the CAPS LGS has actually been benchmarked to harmonize GAP Plus. So it's accepted by most larger buyers. So you need a produce safety plan for sure. So here's a front page of a produce safety plan, and that is a year-long process to do it. It's not a huge thing. I think the way we do it meets growers where they are, and it's pretty easy to get going. You're also going to need annual records, like employee training, daily logs, like cleaning stuff, and that has to do with implementing the plan. And those can be temperature records, like from a remote on your phone, or it can be an inexpensive hardware store thermometer. Water tests, and an annual certificate that you actually pass. So you have to sign up for audits, and Emily talked about that. And then the cost is, probably about $300 to $500 for a CAPS audit, but it can be $1,000 to $2,000 for a GAP audit. So we tend to be a good program for smaller growers, like West Farm, who doesn't have a huge amount of wholesale, but it's very much worth it for them. And when you look at that price tag and you think about if you're selling tens of thousands of dollars worth of stuff, it's well worth it. So with that, I want to pass it to Emily, who talked about the audit program a little bit, and go from
Thanks,
there.
Hans. And I'll just do a very quick overview of the timeline of the audit program in particular for CAPS Plus and LGS. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with those terms, I'll just back up that both of those are audited tiers of the CAPS Produce Safety Program. CAPS Plus requires a little less with the audit, and the LGS stands for the leafy green supplement. So that's for growers who are particularly targeting crops that are raw eaten crops, kale, salad mix, head lettuce, etc. And those requirements are coming down from particular distributors like Hannaford's or Whole Foods. So depending on what crops you're targeting for wholesale markets, you can check in with Hans or I about what audited tier might be best for you and your farm. So the first step, as Hans just went through, is signing up for the CAPS program early in the year. You do that through signing up and creating a membership with the VVBGA. That happens in January, and you let us know your intent for enrolling in the program. And basically, the entire slideshow today showed you kind of the aspects of what goes into your online produce safety plan. So when you're getting into this program for the first time, it's going to take a couple hours to really build out that produce safety plan for the first time. And then every year after that, you're just going in and updating things as needed. If your protocols are changing, if your land use is changing, amount of employees, you're just giving your plan every year a good cursory overview and editing as needed. We ask growers who are enrolled in the program to submit that first draft by April, so that before the really busy growing season hits you've got something into Hans and I for us to review, and we give you feedback for you to continue tweaking it through the growing season. But like Hans said, we really work with growers where you're at to help you, and we're not trying to bog you down with a lot of deadlines through the end of the year. If you are participating in the audit program, you're going to get an email from me with a form to fill out. It gives us all the information we need in order to schedule your audit and assign you to a particular auditor. We have a team of 4 independently contracted auditors who work with us to do the actual audits. So it's not Hans or I visiting your farm. It's a team of 4 great people. And that information starts to coalesce in June and July, where you'll be assigned to an auditor based on the information we see from you in your form, what crops you're hoping to harvest for wholesale, and when it's a good time for the auditor to observe those harvests. You're depending on, again, the crop, your audit will probably happen in July, August, September. We have some folks who are purely potato growers, and so your audit will happen a little later in the year. But again, we work with you around the best time for the auditor to be there. And then what we really need from the grower prior to the audit date is to get your online produce safety plan totally complete, all the edits updated, and all the documentation that Hans referred to, like your water test, your employee training, up and ready so that your auditor can view your online produce safety plan and be prepared for their visit. And then the one other thing to do before completing the online plan is to walk yourself through an self-assessment prior to the auditor's visit. And that just basically ground proofs your plan, make sure everything that you have said you do in your plan is actually happening on the farm. And it's literally walking yourself through a similar format of assessment that your auditor will be looking at when they visit the farm. So it's a great way to just kind of wrap your head around the things that the auditor will be looking at when they visit, and places that to remind yourself what might need to be addressed prior to their visit.
Thanks, Emily. I'll also say I usually almost always do a pre-audit visit with brand new farms that are doing the audit program, just to help answer questions and sort of run through what it's going to be like and look at things, etc. So that's been helpful for a lot of folks.
Thanks for adding that. Yeah, and also just the kind of check in when we see a new grower express interest in the CAPS program, especially the audited tiers, where Hans and I are here to answer any questions along the way as you're filling out your online portion of the produce safety plan. We want to help you and make it feel as easy as it can be. But getting that draft of your plan submitted and getting the actual audit completed is the bulk of the work for the year. After the auditor has completed their audit, they have a week or so to develop their report, and then we'll send out your report to the farm. Generally, you'll either get an audit pass status right away, or you'll have some corrections that the auditor has flagged that need to be addressed either within 30 days or by the time the next audit the following year occurs. So the language of red and yellow flags on the form on the screen details that red flags are anything that are enough of a produce safety concern that they need to be addressed within 30 days, corrected and documented by the grower, and then approved by the auditor before we then issue your certificate. The certificate is issued once two things happen. You've passed your audit and we confirm that everything in your produce safety plan is up to date and passes the standards. And then that certificate is issued and is good for an entire year, through the following calendar year. So if you completed your audit in August of 2026, you'd receive a certificate that's good until the end of 2027. Billing happens through the VVBGA. So in addition, as Hans quoted, it's about $300 to $500 for the audit fee plus the enrollment for that to cover the admin work that the CAPS program covers. If you're a U.S. farm, you're going to get a bill through the VVBGA, and if we do work with some farms in Canada as well, and they get billed separately. And that's all you have for me.
Great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And if this feels like a lot to some of you, I will say that growers who've done this for a while, it gets a lot easier. It's not a huge lift, and it can also add added benefits that help you run a better farm. So keep that in mind. And Annie, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm going to make a pitch here for sure. So veggie berry growers have organized an in-person event to put some of these visuals into practice. Next Thursday up in Johnson, there's going to be a visit with Deep Root Growers Co-op, and then Footbrook Farm and West Farm. So those two farmers and Deep Root agreed that it's a great thing to get people out before the year is too busy. So if you want to kind of put some of this into visual action beyond this performance today, Join us. Pre-registration is needed. We have a few spots open, but it's a time to see what other farmers are doing for their food safety plans and tying it into the wholesale market. So big shout out to USDA grant for supporting that as well. That's the pitch for me. I'm always available to answer any questions around wholesale. So don't be shy about reaching out to me.
Great. Thanks, Annie. And Emily and I are here as well. Our information's there. We're pretty easy to find. And that will do it for today for our presentation. And we have a little bit of time, not very much, for any questions or comments.
Mostly referring, so Linda is one of our independent auditors who will be joining the team this year, and she is also an organic inspector, and she was just commenting about how there's some good overlap between some of the organic requirements, particularly around labeling and traceability, and overlap with the CAPS audit program.
And questions, comments? We'll just pause here for a second and see if there's any last thing. Okay, well, you can always reach out to us. It's been a pleasure to present a little bit of this. I hope it was helpful, and have a great season to those of you who I may not see, and many of you I will, and we will. So goodbye all. Have a great day.